had to put it on gallery view so I can see some of your faces here. I'm going to begin with some words by Sue Browning. And she says, "What are we saying to our children, our family members, our coworkers, or to one another here at church when we say, 'All I ask is that you do your best'? Time and time again, do your best." I have an image of lab mice furiously trying their best to get out of the maze. A few years ago, the expression, "just do your best," started bugging me, she says. It seemed to be a mixed message. It implied you could measure success against your own personal bar, which had merits, but the bar should always be set high. The goal was to always do your best work. And at times, I sensed the phrase was also about being better than another, to be the best in the class, the best in the neighborhood, the best in the office. So when is the best the enemy of the good? Maybe the best is the enemy of the good when in pursuit of perfection, we hold back for fear of mistakes. Maybe the best is the enemy of the good when it drives our energies toward comparison and judgment rather than toward kindness and encouragement. Moving toward a standard of good enough seems to be about making space for slowing down, space to take a few risks, and space to hold one another gently in greater and greater compassion. Sue Browning's words are wise ones, I think, ones that most of us need to hear, maybe often. Our culture is full of the opposite message. How many of you have ever heard the story of the princess and the pea? Wave your hands if you've heard it. Oh, God, I see you. That's so awesome. She had the almost perfect bed, if you remember the story or if you don't. And there were mattresses piled upon mattresses. She kept asking for more. Feather bed upon feather bed. I forget how many were there when she was done. Hundreds, probably. It was a lot. But the number doesn't really matter for the point of the story. Because under all those comfy mattresses, there was a tiny pea. And she just couldn't sleep. That pea was so irritating. She had a terrible night. She wanted something that was more than almost perfect. And that search for perfection, I think, is one of the curses we have laid upon us in this culture. And I think it's also an artifact of white supremacy culture, because only those who have the power in society can even pretend that they can achieve or get close to perfection. And only they feel they have the right to demand it of others. Parents can put impossible pressures on their children to perform, some of which we saw in our opening prelude. Some police will murder suspects that don't react perfectly to being stopped. Because raising your hands and saying, "Don't shoot," is not always enough. The arguments that people make for change, it's demanded that those be phrased just precisely and perfectly and expressed without anger, or they won't be considered valid. Oh, they're so emotional. We don't have to listen to them. They're just angry, whatever category is marginalized. And emotional responses are seen as illogical, when sometimes, and I believe this is true, sometimes our feelings are what bring us to the truth much closer to the truth than we can through pure intellect alone. Like in the Princess and the Pea story, many of our fairy tales reinforce that quest for the perfection. And most of them just set us up for feeling like our own lives are failures. Is that handsome prince ever going to arrive? You know, probably not. So maybe we better settle for a fairly good-natured frog. You know, and then we get that frog and we try to turn him into a prince. Yeah? Anybody does that in a relationship? You kiss the frog and you hug him, and you know, but despite the message from the fairy tales, the frog is still a frog and would probably have been much happier if it stayed in the swamp. Ah, dear friends, I think it's time we realize it. We're all pretty much frogs, and we all live in a swampy, messy, crazy world. And with climate change, which we experienced last night with that storm, which is so not summer California, the swamp, our swamp that we live in, is heating up slowly. And I just hope we notice it in time. That brings up another myth, something that's a myth as I understand it. A real frog will jump out of a pot of water long before he is cooked. That is, as long as no one has clamped the lid tightly shut on her. So let's jump out of the pot before the lid is too tight. You know, the never-ending search that I think we engaged in as a society, I think it's a curse. But it's also not good to never try to improve your life, to never try to improve the world and things. It's always about balance. Our culture tends to push us toward perfection, and we're reminded to do our very best. But what happens when our very best isn't good enough? When our best is nowhere near perfect? Voltaire said that the best is the enemy of the good. And sometimes that's translated as the perfect is the enemy of the good. And we see this all the time in politics, where elected officials don't want to compromise. No law is going to be perfect. And you know what? No policy or church bylaw is going to be perfect either. Democracy in all its forms and permutations is messy. And sometimes to survive that boiling pot of water, you need to act before you find the perfect way to jump out of the pot. Just get out of the pot any way you can. And we see this issue with perfection in our personal lives, in our marriage, our relationships. We see it at work, in our jobs. We see it at church. Because life isn't a fairy tale. Stuff happens. Things go wrong. We blow it. If we don't make a lot of money or even enough money to survive in some comfort and security, we can feel like failures. If our partner still leaves wet towels on the floor after all these years, then we sometimes begin to question the relationship. Why won't they change? I want to make it clear here, though, that Anne does not do that and has never done that. It's just sort of a random example. We might have an addiction that we think we have completely recovered from, but that craving comes back, maybe in a time of particular stress. And if we give in to that craving, sometimes we're afraid to try again. And if we've messed up too many times, we can start feeling like nothing will ever get any better. Find it in school. If we fail one math test and then we decide we hate math. Now, I loved math when I was younger. When you got the answer right, it was right. Talk about search for perfection. There were no gray areas. Geometry was simply beauty. Now, calculus, when I got to calculus, on the other hand, it made absolutely no sense to me. I didn't enjoy it. But statistics, now statistics was fun. I love the idea of something being 95% confident of something. Because, 95% is pretty good. There's nothing wrong with it. There was an old commercial that used to play on TV all the time, back in the days when I watched more TV. Ivory soap was supposed to be 99 and 44 100% pure. I'm sure some of you older folks remember that commercial. Ivory was also the soap that floats. And you know what? We can float too, even if we're not 100% pure. And the search for perfection can damage us spiritually, I think. And I know we're not supposed to do bad things. I don't want you to do bad things. I don't want to do bad things. That's good. But sometimes all of us, even me, everybody, think bad thoughts. We get really mad at somebody and maybe we don't wish them particularly well. And sometimes we also do bad things. Does this mean that we're evil and worthless? Is there a way to really control all of our actions to perfection, much less our thoughts? Now, historical Unitarianism maintained that we all have divine potential and that Jesus was not uniquely divine, that we could all get there. Talk about pressure, though. To live up to our divine nature, we've got to be perfect at everything, in word, in deed, and even in our thoughts. I don't think that's right. I don't think perfection is possible. I think perfection might even be ungodly. And sometime later, I'll do a sermon about process theology and my image of God, which is not perfect. But I love the story from Matthew 15. That's the story where there's a Canaanite woman and she asked Jesus to help her daughter. Now the Jews, and Jesus was a Jew, as we know, they despised the Canaanites. And so Jesus ignored the woman for a while, and then he said, God sent me only to the lost sheep, the people of Israel. And the woman still asked for his help. And he said, it's not right to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs. The woman answered, yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And then Jesus replied, woman, you have great faith. I will do what you asked. Now, I love that story. It's a little obscure, but I love it because it was a woman who challenged Jesus, for one. And I also love it because he realized that he had been wrong. Even Jesus was not perfect. And, Gandhi, a favorite saint of Unitarians and Universalists, Gandhi is also lifted up as an example of almost perfect goodness. And when I learned, I was rather pleased to learn that when he was a young man, Gandhi beat his wife. A lot of you don't know that. It was something that his culture told him was necessary, and he later realized how wrong it was. But even Gandhi was far from perfect. No one is perfect. If we try to make our country perfect, when we look for ideological purity in our candidates, that they've never taken the wrong position on anything ever, If we look for perfect relationships with our family and friends, if we look for the perfect minister who never messes up or doesn't answer email as timely as we would like, when we try to make ourselves perfect, when we do all that, we are closing our minds and our hearts to life, to the reality of the pain and suffering and feelings of inadequacy that we all experience at times. We close ourselves off from love. You know, something I've learned in my life is that the people that I've grown closest to, the ones I really want to spend time with and that I miss so much during this pandemic, the ones I love with all of my heart, those people aren't perfect, and they're willing to admit to that fact. They're able to share their doubts, their fears, their vulnerabilities, and their failures. And other people seem to respond the same way to me. They want to know about the struggles as well as the successes. Because when you've accompanied someone else on a challenging journey, their accomplishment can feel even more wonderful than one of your own. I mentioned the Unitarian side of our heritage earlier and the stress it puts on to be just like God. But the Universalist side is what helps create some balance. Our Universalist ancestors believed in a loving God, a God who loves everyone, no matter who they are and no matter what they have done or haven't done. Universal salvation means no one is left out. Not me, not you, nobody. Leonard Cohen wrote the song we heard as the anthem. It was primarily an anti-war song, but it is also about the beauty of things that are not perfect. The birds they sang at the break of day, start again, I heard them say. Don't dwell on what has passed away or what is yet to be. Ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Sue Browning again said, the best is the enemy of the good when it drives our energies toward comparison and judgment rather than toward kindness and compassion and encouragement. But maybe there's more to it than that. Maybe striving always for perfection robs us of the beauty we might otherwise see if we only let the light in. Can we love weakness as much as we love strength? Can we love it in others as well as in ourselves? Can we free ourselves from always striving for perfection? And how might we do that? A small start might be to just repeat some words of Mary Oliver. I know a lot of you know them. Change it slightly to the personal pronoun. I do not have to be good. Say it with me. I do not have to be good. I do not have to walk on my knees for 100 miles through a desert, repenting. I do not have to walk on my knees for 100 miles through a desert, repenting. I only have to let the soft animal of my body love what it loves. I only have to let the soft animal of my body love what it loves. We, all of us, no matter our failings and our flaws, have a place, not only in the family of things, but also in this religious community and in our wider world. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to show weakness or admit mistakes. Failure and mistakes just mean you are human. And you know what? Human is a fabulous thing to be. Love the other humans around you. They are not perfect, but they're pretty fabulous as well. There is a crack in everything. Amen and blessed be.